This week, we get some amazing history, first-hand accounts and recollections from Sovereign Grand Commander Cowles about the initial planning of the George Washington Masonic National Memorial. It's as if we are traveling back in time, talking to Cowles himself. Then, also, we've got a brand new Masonic Mythbusters segment with Worshipful Brother Patrick Day. It's often assumed that George Washington received the degrees of the Royal Arch because mainly the iconography represented on his apron presented to him by the Marquis de Lafayette. But, as always, there's more to the story. Just like the Transformers, there's more meets the eye. All this and more. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry. Here's your host, Brother Robert Johnson.
Welcome back to the show. This is episode number 687. Since July of 2011, the Whence Came You podcast has been creating weekly Masonic education for anyone interested in Freemasonry and its kindred sciences. This is no small endeavor requiring hours of work each week on top of what we all have: work, kids, spouses, and lodge. If you're curious on how to help support this show, head on over to wcypodcast.com, click on Support the Show, and check out the various options available to you. We have contributor, fellow, producer, and legacy partner tiers of financial support for this show. All monies raised goes right back into this program and Masonic education, and I thank you for any considerations. As an aside, we also accept one-time donations. Check out the site to see it all, and the benefits you'll get for becoming a contributor, a fellow producer, or legacy partner. I want to thank our current contributors, fellows, producers, and legacy partners out there, whether past or present. Thank you so much for allowing this show to continue and spread the light of Masonry. Presentation schedules coming up. October 4th, we've got something called Ashes to Aprons happening at Oak Lawn Lodge, 8:15. Of course, October 10th and 11th will be at Grand Lodge of Illinois, the annual communications. It'll be a great sessions event. Also, I'm very excited because we've got Stephen L. Harrison presenting at the annual Illinois Lodge of Research annual meeting, which is probably going to be 3 p.m. at the hotel. All the details for that you can find on IllinoisLodgeOfResearch.org and on the Illinois Lodge of Research Facebook page. After that, we've got a ton of stuff lining up in 2026. So if you're interested in having some Masonic education out at your event, just shoot me a message, whether it's through the website or you can just email me direct at admin@wcypodcast.com. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Speaking of Masonic education and coming up, there is a great event happening in Central Virginia. The historic Masons Hall Richmond Randolph Lodge, which was established all the way back in 1787, is having an amazing event on Saturday, September 27th. It's going to be an all-day deal, 9 to 5, right there in Richmond, Virginia. The event will be open to both Masons and those curious about Freemasonry, a day full of Masonic education on history, civic connections, and even esoteric aspects. They've got an amazing lineup of speakers. Matthew Parker, founder of the North Carolina Masonic Research Society, chair of the Grand Lodge Committee on Public Relations, and a member of the Grand Lodge Library Committee. Then, how about John T. Ruark from the Masonic Roundtable, past master of the Patriot Lodge 1957 in Fairfax, Virginia? How about past Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of North Carolina, 33rd degree, Sean Bradshaw, a proud Masonic esotericist because he believes in the transformational power of the craft's rituals. And how about another past Grand Master of Washington, D.C. from 2008, 35 years of professional experience in the fields of public diplomacy and cultural intelligence, most worshipful Grand Master Akram R. Elias. Holy cow. Now, John's going to be talking about Stoic resilience in the age of uncertainty, one of my favorite presentations to come out, not just from John, from anyone in the realm of speaking right now, one of my favorite talks he does. Most worshipful brother Sean Bradshaw is going to be doing something about the hero's journey. Matt Parker will be doing something on subduing your passions. Now, I've heard this presentation. It's excellent. Highly recommend. And Akram R. Elias, Freemasonry as an Initiatic Society and the Great Experiment. This is something I've heard him speak multiple times on, it's always a little bit different. And I will say this, it is always ready to charge your Masonic and Civic batteries. So again, check this event out. It's going to happen September 27th, 9 to 5 at Richmond Randolph, the historic Masons Hall in Richmond. If you have questions, please send an email to Brother David Allen. You can check more about the event at richmondrandolph19.com. And if you hover over events, you'll see it, Central Virginia Masonic Con. We'll also have a link back to this on the MasonicConferences.com website. Thanks again to these guys for putting together an amazing event, which, I'll be honest, if I can't make it out to this, I'm going to be a little bummed. Oh, and I almost forgot. How much are tickets for this? How about just $40 plus a PayPal fee? What? Incredible. Affordable, awesome Masonic education. Don't miss it. I promise. It's going to be a great time. First up this week, we've got a brand new Masonic Mythbusters with Worshipful Brother Patrick Day. When he first sent this over to me, I thought, ooh, this may be a little controversial, and maybe it is, but in a great way. Now, I encourage you to stick through it because you're definitely going to get more informed on this topic. Was George Washington a Royal Arch Mason? Well, let's see what Patrick has to say.
In a digital landscape filled with historical inaccuracy, out-of-context quotes on memes and sound bites, there is an epidemic of fraternal occult, mythological, and historical misinformation. It's time to set the record straight. Masonic Mythbusters with Patrick Day.
It is typically assumed that George Washington was a Royal Arch Mason, or it is assumed that he was a Mark Master, though in the 18th century it was not requisite to be a Mark Master in order to be a Royal Arch Mason. For the most part, the way we understand from the paucity of records, lodges of Mark Masters were separate bodies from the Blue Lodge, while Blue Lodges did confer the Royal Arch. That said, it was one or the other, but usually it's assumed that Washington was a Royal Arch Mason. From what I can tell, most claims of Washington's Royal Arch status is based on one of his Masonic aprons, namely the one gifted to him by the Marquis de Lafayette. This apron was specifically made by the Madame de Lafayette for Washington. On the flap of this apron is the iconic Mark Master initialization, HTWSSTKS. Most of the emblems on the apron are from the Blue Lodge system, but that initialization is specifically Mark Master. There is one other emblem that is speculated to be of the Royal Arch, namely the pig pen on the right of center, which resembles part of the Royal Arch cipher. I mean, I guess, but that cipher really only makes sense when it is the pig pen and the X. However, I'd like to point out that an apron is not proof of membership. I mean, I have my great-grandfather's Shriner hat and some miscellaneous Shrine, Eastern Star, and Scottish Rite regalia and paraphernalia in my collection, but that does not mean I'm affiliated with any of those orders. We should bear in mind that the apron was made by the Madame de Lafayette. For all we know, she just picked a bunch of Masonic emblems, perhaps with some direction from her husband, and there was probably little consideration to double check if Washington was a Mark Master or a Royal Arch Mason. I don't know how 18th century Continental Freemasonry works with the Royal Arch, Mark Master, and Blue Lodge degrees, but there could be some confusion and confabulation when making this apron. For instance, at the center of the Mark Master initialization is a beehive. Many have speculated that this was Washington's mark, because that's where you're supposed to put your mark. However, this is such a specific Blue Lodge emblem that it is equally as doubtful to be Washington's mark as much as it would be his mark. Like I said, the apron is a collection of a lot of Masonic emblems put together by a non-Mason. The apron was probably just a lovely gesture and did not need to be super duper accurate. Yet there is apparently proof of membership. Well, sort of. Not really. Whatever evidence you have seen, statements made, dates given, whatever, they will likely be derived from only a few sources, and they are all misunderstanding each other, being derivative of each other, and steadily corrupting the information over the decades. Now, to be transparent, I will largely be relying on an unpublished paper by George Byers Clark. Clark might have been one of the greatest Masonic historians of the last century. If you've ever seen one of those big maps of the United States with the genealogy of the Grand Lodges as they descend from state to state, that was made by him. Now, he published very little in his life, or he published very little compared to how much research he did. We have 2 filing cabinets in the Grand Lodge of Colorado that are packed with all his research. I regularly go into his files when researching things because, the dude had everything. He's crazy the things I find in his files. I rarely find faults in Clark's research. I find faults, but it's rare. Now here, Clark largely relies on the research and first-hand investigation of others. Hence my reliance on his research here concerning Washington and the Royal Arch, which I believe are reliable and more than valid, even though he wrote this in the 1930s. Some of the correspondences he describes are in his files in the Grand Lodge, which it really illustrates the lengths he went to get to the bottom of things. Now, I will also be relying on information from Robert Freak Gould's History of Freemasonry, Hugo Tash's work, The Facts About George Washington as a Freemason, and J. Ross Robertson's The History of Freemasonry in Canada. What you may have read in any number of sources is that in Canada is a wooden case bearing a Bible with a plate on the box stating that Washington received a, quote, degree of Masonry obligated upon this particular Bible, and that the Bible was taken by the enemy and returned twice. His Bible is claimed to belong to the military lodge connected with the British 46th Regiment in Canada, said to be there because of the French and Indian War. Okay, so every bit of that is true, more or less, but not when put together. The individual facts are actual facts, just when you put them together, they actually aren't true. There are a lot of problems here, and I have seen a number of different variations on this. Each are fraught with errors. I don't really want to get into all the different versions of their errors, so we'll just go over the facts as we know them, and then apply these facts against the more general Masonic claims. The 46th Regiment of Foot was created in 1741 as a British infantry unit. They would be stationed for some years in Scotland and later Ireland. In 1852, enlisted in the 46th Regiment would petition and on March 4th, 1752, would receive a warrant from the Grand Lodge of Ireland as the Lodge of Social and Military Virtues, number 227. In 1757, they would depart for Nova Scotia to engage in the French and Indian War. In 1761, the 46th would relocate to the West Indies. The lodge would remain attached to the 46th Regiment until 1847, after over a century of being connected. They would later affiliate with the Grand Lodge of Quebec at its founding in 1869 as the Lodge of Antiquity No. 1. The lodge kept their paraphernalia and records in a wooden trunk. In 1831, Colonel and Brother Lacey, I don't have a first name for him, came across this case and opened it up. According to J. Ross Robertson in his History of Freemasonry in Canada, Lacey found the lock on the trunk was already broken, and inside were some jewels, though some of the Masonic jewels were missing, the minutes book, a copy of the bylaws, and the warrant from the Grand Lodge of Ireland, which was faded and damaged so badly that it was almost unreadable. He also found a Bible. Robertson does not believe this Bible that purportedly Washington was obligated upon was the same Bible that Lacey finds. Robertson traces the history of this Bible through the efforts of Reverend R. Stewart Patterson. who says that the Bible had belonged to a Bartholomew West of New Bedford, Massachusetts. And on September 5th, 1778, the British destroyed the town and West's house, having taken from his home some valuable items, including a Bible. The 46th Regiment did indeed engage in the New Bedford campaign in September of 1778, and it is here that the Bible passed into their possession. The Bible, as mentioned, was captured twice. Sometime after the Bible had been taken from the West family, it was taken by American forces, that is, the colonial rebels, but then returned shortly thereafter back to the British. It was again taken by French on the island of Dominica, the West Indies, in 1804, and was subsequently returned by the French government. Following this, the Bible was put into a wooden case with a silver plaque inscribed with, quote, "On this sacred volume, Washington received a degree of masonry. It was twice taken by the enemy, and both times returned to the regiment with all the honors of war," end quote. There is a lot of mystery surrounding any surviving evidence of Washington's connection with the 46th Regiment of Foot and the lodge connected to it. Namely, that any evidence that purportedly existed has gone missing. For instance, the insistence that Washington's name was in the minutes book, it's not there. You can just go open the minutes book, it still survives, it's not there. Supposedly, Washington had inscribed his name in the Bible, which would undoubtedly connect Washington to this very Bible. However, when the regiment was stationed in Bermuda circa 1815, the page bearing Washington's signature was missing. How convenient. I seriously doubt Brother Lacey's testimony here because the regiment was stationed in Australia throughout the 1810s and the 1820s. So how could they be in Bermuda in 1815? Yeah, no documentary evidence exists which would connect Washington to this Bible, much less connect Washington to the 46th Regiment whatsoever. Truth be told, Washington never had any involvement with the 46 at any point in his military career, and George Washington's life and career is one of the most studied lives in American history. His entire life has been combed over by historians for centuries. I have never found anywhere where anyone connects Washington to the 46, with the exception of Masons. Masons are the only one who connect him to the 46. Washington and the 46 regiments do not seem to have ever crossed during the French and Indian War, and they would be enemies during the American Revolution. The only evidence that Washington had any connection with this Bible is the inscription on the silver plate on the box. And the only evidence that he took the Mark Master or Royal Arch degrees is part of the inscription says, "On this sacred volume, Washington received a degree of masonry." Washington received the degrees of masonry from November 4th, 1752 to August 4th, 1753 in Fredericksburg Lodge number 22 in Alexandria, Virginia. The 46th Regiment did not arrive in America until 1757. So the degree mentioned could not be one of the Blue Lodge degrees. Thus, it is presumed that he took the Mark Master or the Royal Arch. It is speculated that he could have been re-obligated as a Master Mason because he could not produce evidence that he was such. However, that's just conjectural, as if he was a Royal Arch Mason as well. Washington would have had to have received one of those degrees sometime after 1757, but before the incident at Dominica in 1804, as that is around the time when the box receives the plaque commemorating Washington's obligation and the capture and return of the Bible to the regiment. Though really, we may say it had to have been before the Revolution in 1776. I mean, I know Masons love to tell stories of Masons meeting and fraternizing across enemy lines, but the reality is that is much more rare than you may think or want to believe. All of this thus far has been testimonies, recollections, and histories put together in the 19th century. And we don't seem to have anyone verifying any of this, such as Robertson, who was working from documentation and testimony. what has been ascertained about this Bible since then that is more recent, what has been verified. In 1936, George Clark would write to the Grand Secretary of Quebec, W.W. Williamson, who had actually previously lived in Denver, Colorado, and was a member of Denver Lodge Number 5 in the late 1880s. Williamson would confer with the Lodge historian of the Lodge of Antiquity, and both men would review artifacts and documents together because everyone was eager to resolve this matter. It turns out that everything Robertson had described about the 46th Regiment in his History of Freemasonry in Canada was from the testimony of Alex Murray. Seems to be rocky testimony here, but Williamson actually personally knew Alex Murray, and so he actually would attest to his veracity as a serious Masonic student, so take that for what it is. It turns out that the Bible in the possession of Lodge of Antiquity number 1 in 1936 was not the same Bible described previously. The one the Lodge has was printed in 1599, while the one described previously was said to have been printed in 1712. The Bible they do have was indeed given to them by the 46th Regiment in Kingston, Ontario, when the Lodge and the regiment parted ways. No one in 1936 was entirely sure what became of the Bible that Washington purportedly was obligated upon. There had only been testimony of brothers who remember the Bible. It was possible that the 46th Regiment still had that infamous Bible at least as late as 1899, but this is capricious speculation. The regiment gave the Lodge a Bible, but not the one of Masonic significance, but rather some other Bible. It could be true, but that seems kind of unlikely. You'd think they would give the Bible of Masonic significance to the Lodge. Interesting side note here, the Bible the Lodge does have is a copy of the Breaches Bible, i.e. the Geneva Bible. It gets the name Breaches Bible because of translation of Genesis 3:7, in which Adam and Eve gathered fig leaves and made themselves breeches. Heh. I know I've spent a lot of time here detailing this Bible and the 46th Regiment. However, the thing is that this Bible is the only evidence, no matter how spurious, that Washington received another degree in connection with this regiment. The Lodge of Antiquity did, however, have some facsimile reproductions of the regimental Bible, which appears to be different from their current Bible. So there was 2 Bibles, but nothing on the reproductions indicates Washington's connection with it. But also, there was a statement that Washington's connection to the Lodge was written on a set of bylaws, which is conveniently missing. Remember, again, a lot of this is just coming from testimony of people who remembered this stuff. And ultimately, we're at a loss here. No one can say when or where Washington could have received the Royal Arch. There really is no evidence extant that Washington had any connection with the 46th Regiment, nor received another degree beyond Master Mason. Robert Gould believed the story of Washington and this Bible to be totally bogus, and Williamson and the Lodge of Antiquities historian believed this to be spurious as well. Now, I will say this, I will not blame you if you still believe Washington was a Royal Arch Mason. There are just a number of curious things that do raise suspicions that he may have received another degree at some point in his Masonic career. The Lafayette apron does raise an eyebrow, even if it's not proof. We know his lodge in Alexandria did confer the Royal Arch on 3 Masons on December 22nd, 1753, just a few months after Washington was raised as a Master Mason. The 3 names listed, none of them were Washington, but regardless. So we know his lodge could and would confer the Royal Arch, but we never know if Washington was one of those who received it at any later point. While I personally do not believe Washington was a Royal Arch Mason, I will not fault anyone for continuing to believe that he was. The truth of the matter is that all previously presented evidence simply does not hold up to scrutiny.
All right, what an incredible articulation of the facts regarding this. As Patrick says, we can't fault anyone for believing that Washington was a Royal Archmason. There seems to be this air and potential evidence to support it, but it doesn't really line up. And there's nothing concrete or factual that you can hold in your hand, see, or anything else. So, I don't know, right? Like, the jury's still out? I wonder what your thoughts are. I welcome any comments on our YouTube channel as well as on the social media. And if you'd like to hold a deeper conversation, check it out on a Facebook group, Craftsman Plus, which again is for all of our patrons of the WCY podcast. Now, continuing a new segment that we started a couple of weeks ago, I wanted to read some of the Grand Commander's messages from the New Age magazine, specifically the Grand Commander's messages that were written by Henry C. Clausen. You may know him as the man behind several Masonic books like Clausen's Commentaries on Morals and Dogma, or perhaps Beyond the Ordinary, or other Masonic texts. These can be rather hard to find because they were, I guess, well, in a way buried, in another way bought up by collectors and never really reprinted. And because they're really owned by the Scottish Rite, I don't know how often they reprint them. Anyway, interestingly enough, let's read what Grand Commander Henry C. Clausen had to say in the New Age magazine for February 1977, Men Who Started the Movement. The history of the world, said Thomas Carlyle, is but the biography of great men. This theme can be applied to the George Washington Masonic National Memorial at Alexandria, Virginia. Today, we view the vastness, the dignity, and the towering height of this demonstration in enduring stone of a Freemason's faith. It symbolizes our devotion to the sweep of Washington's vision, his unselfish life's effort, and express the tolerance, the high ideals, the enlightened citizenship, and the stability of our fraternity. Also that we are champions of freedom and liberty and stand ever ready to oppose ignorance and superstition, despotism, and tyranny. How important, therefore, that we should keep green the memory of those men of great dreams who were behind the movement to erect this superior structure. Apparently, there is no descriptive literature extant that does this. Perhaps the most accurate recognition comes from my discovery of a memorandum in our possession of one of my predecessors, Sovereign Grand Commander John H. Cowles. He and others of his period strongly desired that a building be erected in which there would be displayed and protected the relics of our brother George Washington, then in the possession of the Alexandria Washington Lodge No. 22. As its first master under the Grand Lodge of Virginia Charter, Washington was also the president at the time of the United States. I feel, therefore, that these words from the pen of Brother Cowles accurately describe the situation and should be preserved. Here they are in part, as he recorded them in 1932. Quote, in the fall of 1909, being Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Kentucky, I received an invitation to attend a celebration of Washington's birthday, February 22, 1910, in Alexandria, Virginia. I do not remember whether the invitation came from Alexandria Washington Lodge and was approved by the Grand Master, Brother Eagleston, or whether the invitation came from the Grand Master at the request of Alexandria Washington Lodge. I accepted and went to Alexandria, where I met a number of others, and we were entertained in the homes of members of Alexandria Washington Lodge. Following is a list of the Grand Masters who attended: Lee of Alabama, Verplanck of Connecticut, Ober of the District of Columbia, Banks of Georgia, Cowles of Kentucky, Shryock of Maryland, Johnson of South Carolina, Clark of West Virginia, and McChesney of Virginia. The following past Grand Masters were present: Lawler of California, Day of Delaware, Richardson of Tennessee, who was also Grand Commander of the Supreme Council of the Southern Jurisdiction at the time, Nichols of Texas, and Burnham of New Hampshire. Also, the Deputy Grand Masters present were Dara of Illinois and Sherman of New Jersey, and in addition, Grand Secretary Ross of Vermont and William S. Linton representing Grand Master Hume of Michigan. On Washington's birthday, we assembled, and we learned that the Honorable Oscar Lawler, former congressman from California, had visited the lodge on 2 or 3 occasions and had suggested and even urged that a fireproof structure should be erected for the purpose of preserving the marvelous collection of Masonic and other items and articles that was owned by Alexandria Washington Lodge. This was valued at something like $1 million, so we were told. And Brother Charles H. Callahan, Master of Alexandria Washington Lodge, explained that something less than 50 years before there had been a fire in which many valuable articles had been lost. He told the congressman that a fireproof structure could be erected which would eliminate fire hazard and also, to a certain extent, at least prevent thievery. He placed the cost at about $100,000. The question was earnestly discussed as to whether or not the Masons in the United States would be interested enough to construct a building to cost something like the amount for the purpose of a permanent place for the priceless heirlooms of that lodge. We were so impressed with the importance of it and so strong in our belief that it should be done, after having listened to past Grand Master Eagleston of Virginia and Worshipful Grand Master McChesney, who had succeeded Grand Master Eagleston, that a committee on organization was appointed. This committee was composed of James D. Richardson, Grand Commander of the Southern Supreme Council, as Chairman Shryock of Maryland, Dara of Illinois, Banks of Georgia, Ross of Vermont, Day of Delaware, Cowles of Kentucky, Johnson of South Carolina, Nichols of Texas, Norton, Barrett, and Callahan of Alexandria Washington Lodge. This committee, after deliberation, reportedly favorably and strongly for the whole idea, and this was adopted by those present, and each of them signed the resolution. The business was conducted by fixing the date for permanent organization for February 22, 1911, to see if by that time the sentiment throughout the country seemed to justify it. Someone either then or afterward made a suggestion that it would be a good idea to couple it with the erection of the Masonic Memorial Building to George Washington. Some of us felt we would like to feel out the sentiment of some of the leaders in our respective jurisdictions before a definite action, and, if it were favorable, we would return the following year and report. On February 22, 1911, the George Washington National Masonic Memorial Association was permanently organized, with Thomas J. Shryock, Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Maryland, and its first president. A constitution was adopted in which the membership was composed of the heads of the several Masonic grand bodies in the United States, and one representative from each Grand Lodge, and such honorary members as the association decided upon from time to time. I shall not attempt to give the dates as to the happenings which I shall describe, for quite a number of the incidents and happenings are not in the minutes of the organization, and neither am I certain with regard to all of them. A Ways and Means Committee was appointed, of which Clarence P. King, president of the Washington Railway and Electric Company, was chairman. The other members were F. H. Treat, president of the Washington and Virginia Railway Company, Congressman William B. McKinley of Illinois, John H. Cowles, William L. Andrews of Virginia, and J. Claude Kuiper of the District of Columbia. A charter roll of honor was established consisting of $1,100 subscribers allotted to the several jurisdictions, and the association was then on its way, but the going was very difficult. The Grand Lodges of Maryland, Michigan, Iowa, and Kentucky were the first to make goodly contributions for the erection of the temple. There was a free discussion as to what the temple should cost. A resolution was adopted, however, that 25% of the amount collected should be set aside as an endowment fund to support the temple. $500,000 was tentatively agreed upon as the cost of the building. According to the Masonic population of Kentucky at that time, Kentucky's part amounted to about 39 cents per capita of the Freemasons in the state. It was not very long before I had practically that entire amount paid in or pledged. Alexandria Washington Lodge took care of the expenses of these meetings, and later Brother Charles H. Callahan wrote a book, Washington the Mason, and gave the results of the sale of it for the purpose of taking care of the expenses of these meetings, and for several years this was done. However, matters progressed rather slowly for the next year or so, which opposition being encountered by charges that the whole scheme was for the purpose of bringing about a general Grand Lodge of symbolic masonry in the United States, and the fear of a great many that such would be the result of this organization. To meet this objection, later on the Constitution was changed so as to permit the quote-unquote Order of the Eastern Star, the Shriners, the Grotto, in fact all of the Allied Masonic organizations, to join in the work on an equal basis with the Grand Lodges. This refuted the idea of a general Grand Lodge, and it gave also a very strong talking point, in that this objective was the only one attempted by all the Masons of the United States, of all degrees and allied degrees, and the work came along a little faster, our Supreme Council giving $10,000. In the meantime, the Ways and Means Committee did not function as well as it might have. The chairman was away a great deal of the time, and his many duties precluded much activity. Congressman McKinley was not here except when Congress was in session, and the duties devolved upon J. Claude Kuiper and myself very largely. Later on, I became chairman of the committee, and other members were added to the committee. There followed money-raising activities, site recommendations resulting in the selection of Shooter's Hill at Alexandria, and the election of Brother Cowles as treasurer, and appointment of an advisory committee comprising the following: John Wanamaker, Chairman Vice President Thomas R. Marshall, Ex-President William H. Taft, Senator George E. Chamberlain, Senator Francis E. Warren, General Nelson A. Miles, General Leonard Wood, Admiral George W. Baird, Governor Frank O. Loden, Townsend Scudder, Jurist ex-Speaker Champ Clark, Secretary of the Treasury Carter Glass, and ex-Governor Philip L. Goldsboro of Maryland. It was a great loss to the association when President Shryock passed away. Several members of the association solicited me to accept the presidency, first Vice President Johnson stating that he was satisfied that I was the one that should accept the office of president. I declined, giving the reason that being chairman of the Ways and Means Committee was as important a work as that of president, and that I would work just as hard in that position, or harder, and also as treasurer, than I would as president. That was what we needed, and what was to get some of the large Grand Lodges in the East interested in the organization, and that L.A. Watrous, an ex-lieutenant governor of Pennsylvania and a past Grand Master besides being a very wealthy man, seemed to me to be the one to accept the president of the association, that we would be able to get the Grand Lodges of Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey particularly interested in it, as I understood that he was well known by the leading Masons in those states, and I asked Brother Johnson to nominate him for the presidency, so it was all arranged beforehand, and he was elected to that office. Massachusetts Consistory of the Northern Masonic Jurisdiction in the Valley of Boston contributed $10,000, and I have often remarked that it was the only organization that I ever heard of which elected a man an honorary member for taking money from it, and that is true in the case of the Scottish Rite bodies in Boston. Upon my appeal, they contributed $10,000, and then made me an honorary member of Massachusetts Consistory. In all of my experience, there is nothing that ever pleased me more than this. Then there followed further organizational details and revisions, contribution increases, and personal changes. For example, the new Constitution provided for incorporation under the laws of Virginia by the 49 Grand Lodges in the United States, thus doing away with the organization, as it had existed under the laws of Virginia governing churches and fraternal organizations. Instead, the Ways and Means Committee, a board of directors, was provided for, with full power to continue with the erection of the building, to purchase more ground, or sell any property if they desired." End quote. The previous gives the genesis, the early history, and the original plans of these men of vision who started the movement. The interest of the Masonic fraternity, the Grand Lodges, and allied Masonic organizations in the United States was aroused. The cornerstone was laid November 1st, 1923, with Charles H. Callahan of Virginia as acting Grand Master. President Calvin Coolidge and Chief Justice William Howard Taft assisted in spreading the cement. 8½ years later, the dedicatory rites, with President Herbert Hoover assisting, were held on May 12, 1932, during the Washington bicentennial year. The American Freemasons now have labored and contributed well over half a century toward the completion and maintenance of this inspiring structure. Their pride in that achievement and in the fulfillment of the dreams of those who started the movement has been well justified. For this outstanding architectural triumph will attract visiting Masons throughout the world like a Mecca for years to come. Signed, Henry C. Clausen, Sovereign Grand Commander. There's some wonderful history there, going back, discussing, of course, the George Washington National Masonic Memorial. Now, something you may not know is that the George Washington Masonic National Memorial has something called the George Washington Memorial Society. You can become a member of this society. It really comprises a selective group of members who are dedicated to supporting the memorial and its mission. I urge you to check it out. You can become a member, you pay renewal dues and things, but if you go to gwmemorial.org, click on Support the Memorial, and you'll see a plethora of ways to help support this amazing endeavor. Check it out when you can. Of course, I'll have links to this back in the show notes. I want to take just a brief moment to tell you all to look out for the July-August edition of the Lyceum, the official Masonic education publication of the Grand Lodge of Illinois. I, as well as Brother Darren A. Laners, put together this publication. It is an official publication of the Grand Lodge of Illinois under our Education Committee, of which I am a member. The reason why I plug it on the show is not only is it just a great magazine, I may be biased, but it is because the educational content of the magazine is always just that, educational in nature. It is not designed to promote any specific thing of a Grand Lodge, etc. It is Masonic content and articles related to Masonic philosophy and those types of things. Right now, we are in the midst of a 3-issue stint. We started in June with Brotherly Love as the theme for the issue. The July-August issue, which will be coming very soon, within the next week or less, is on relief. And of course, we will be following it up in September with Truth. You'll be able to check that out if you're on the Grand Lodge of Illinois email list, as well as you can go to the website, ilmason.org, or you can find it on the Illinois Lodge of Research's website under the tab for Grand Lodge Education. Just to point this out again, sometimes it gets mixed up, but the Illinois Lodge of Research is not responsible for the Lyceum. We simply just help promote it. Once more, I want to thank our producers, fellows, contributors, and legacy partners of the show. If you're curious on how to help support this program, head on over to the website, wcypodcast.com, click on Support the Show, and check out the various options. That's it for this week. One more time, thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you all next week with more Masonic education, and until then, stay on the level. For Whence Came You, I'm Robert Johnson. Take care.
You've been listening to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry with your host, Brother Robert Johnson. Be sure to join us for our next edition.
CY Media.
Well, that BBS not the map.
Autobots, roll out! Roll out! Roll out! Roll out! Roll out!